Every evening, a servant carried a hot meal to the prince's chamber. Every morning, the tray returned untouched. This continued for years. The strange part wasn't that the prince never ate. The strange part was that everyone knew why. Because the prince was dead. And yet no one in the kingdom was allowed to say it. Prince Alexander was only 12 years old when illness swept through the palace and claimed his life. He was the only son of King Edmund, the future heir to the throne, and the hope of an entire kingdom. When the royal physicians announced his death, servants wept in the corridors, priests prepared funeral prayers, noble families dressed in black. But the funeral never happened. For 3 days, King Edmund locked himself inside his chambers. When he finally emerged, grief had transformed into something far stranger. "The prince is alive," he declared. The court stood frozen. Everyone assumed the king was overwhelmed by sorrow and would soon accept reality. He never did. The prince's room remained untouched. His clothes continued to be washed. His teachers continued preparing lessons. Fresh flowers were placed beside his bed every morning. Most disturbing of all, the servants were ordered to deliver meals to his chamber every evening. The food always remained untouched. Still, the ritual continued. At first, some advisors tried to reason with the king. One suggested a proper funeral. He was immediately dismissed. A servant accidentally referred to the prince in the past tense. She disappeared from the palace the next day. Soon everyone understood the rules. You did not mention the prince's death. You did not question the king. And above all, you pretended. Months passed, then years. An empty chair was placed beside the king during council meetings. Whenever important matters were discussed, King Edmund would occasionally turn toward the chair and ask for his son's opinion. He would pause, nod thoughtfully, then continue speaking as though he had received an answer. The nobles played along. What choice did they have? Every year, the prince's birthday was celebrated with feasts and gifts. Musicians played songs in his honor. During royal parades, an extra horse rode beside the king to represent the absent heir. The lie grew larger. Young servants who arrived years later had never even seen Prince Alexander. Yet they were taught to bow respectfully whenever they passed his chambers. Some began to wonder if the prince truly lived somewhere inside the palace. The king himself appeared happier. He spoke often about his son's future, the wars he would win, the queen he would marry, the grandchildren he would one day produce. The courtiers listened silently, trapped inside a fantasy they could not escape. The palace had become a theater. Every servant was an actor. Every noble was part of the performance. And the king was both audience and director. Then came a young servant named Thomas. Unlike the other, he had arrived years after the prince's death. To him, the entire situation seemed absurd. One afternoon, while working in the library, he quietly laughed and asked another servant, "Why do we keep pretending for a dead boy?" Unfortunately, a guard overheard him. By the next morning, the entire court had been summoned to the throne room. Thomas stood trembling before the king. Beside the throne sat the prince's empty chair. The hall was silent. The king stared at him before pointing toward the chair. "Apologize to my son." Thomas froze. There was no one there, only an empty seat. The king's face darkened. "Apologize." The young servant realized this was no longer about the prince. It was about obedience. Slowly he turned toward the empty chair. "I'm sorry, Your Highness." The king smiled, and so did everyone else. In that moment, the court understood a terrifying truth. The lie was no longer protecting the king from grief. The lie was becoming more important than reality itself. Years later, King Edmund died. When servants finally entered the prince's chamber, they found dust covering every surface. The bed remained perfectly made. Books sat untouched on shelves, and stacked against the wall were hundreds of unopened gifts collected over the years. Birthday presents, holiday presents, tokens from nobles seeking favor, all waiting for a prince who would never return. The illusion ended in a single day, but the damage remained. Careers had been destroyed, families had lived in fear, an entire kingdom had been forced to deny reality to satisfy one man's grief. Perhaps that is the darkest lesson hidden within this story. The truth can be painful, but when people become afraid to speak it, even the most obvious lie can survive for years. And when power is strong enough, a fantasy can become a prison for everyone trapped inside it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more dark historical tales, forgotten mysteries, and disturbing stories from the shadows of history. Until next time, thank you for watching.